You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up on today's programme, lava from La Palma's volcano reaches the sea, sparking fears of toxic gas being released into the atmosphere. The UN's climate chief tells Sky News it's unlikely China will bring forward its zero carbon target date in time for the COP26 summit. And Bangkok on alert as a tropical storm leaves much of Thailand underwater. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news show, where we track the changes happening to our world right now and challenge those coming up with the solutions. Now, 9 days after it first erupted, lava from the Cumbre Vieja volcano on the Canary island of La Palma has reached the Atlantic Ocean. There are fears that as the lava, which is at a temperature of around 1,200 degrees Celsius, reacts with the seawater, it could create toxic hydrochloric acid vapour. Now, as a precaution, everyone within a 2-mile radius of where the lava met the sea has been told to stay indoors. Well, in a moment, we'll hear from an expert in the environmental impact of volcanic gases. But first, Sky's Becky Cottrell is live for us on La Palma tonight. So, Becky, tell us what the situation is like there now.
Well, hopefully just behind me you can see all of that smoke and steam rising off the water. As you mentioned, that lava is incredibly hot, and when it hits the water, it creates a thermal shock. Also, what is happening is that as the lava is cooling and hardening on the water, it's created what I would describe as a headland. Here they're calling it a lava vent that's sort of expanding out into the sea and hardening and creating a new structure. Now, that steam that is coming off of the water, as you mentioned, that is toxic. It contains hydrochloric acid. And if you breathe it in or get it in your eyes, it is dangerous. And that is why the people nearby have been told to stay inside. Now, we have just been through those towns. People are not staying inside. But to be honest, at the moment, it doesn't seem that they really need to. The government has said that the air quality is still good. I'm sure, as you can tell, it's extremely windy, and the wind is blowing that gas away from the towns rather than towards them. So for now, they are safe. But obviously, the concern is the wind could change and the air quality could also change.
Becky, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's get the thoughts then now of Dr. Evgenia Ilyanskaya from the University of Leeds School of Earth and Environment, and whose work focuses on volcanic gases and their impact on the environment. So thanks very much indeed for talking to us today. So give us a sense of the impact of a volcanic eruption on the environment then.
Yeah, volcanic eruptions, they can emit huge quantities of potentially toxic elements. And in fact, individual eruptions can match total anthropogenic emissions of some polluting chemicals from entire countries, large countries such as China and the USA. So you can imagine living downwind of such a volcano can potentially have really harmful consequences to health.
So obviously there's the impact of those toxic gases being released into the atmosphere. Does that have an effect on global warming? Can it have an impact on climate change?
No, it doesn't. Not from eruptions such as this one. The chemicals that we should be concerned about have an impact on health and air quality, but not climate.
And what about the fact that the lava has now reached the sea in La Palma? What impact could that have on the biodiversity of the land that's being covered, but also the seabed?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. It's something that just hasn't been studied very well at all. We know from studies in Hawaii, where there are common events such as this one, that the chemistry is very complicated, and it's actually quite different from eruptions that just happen on land. For instance, we get a lot more emission of certain trace elements such as copper, and what impact that has on the biodiversity we just don't know. There are indications, so some of these trace elements are very beneficial in small quantities, but the boundary is very easily crossed into them being toxic. So I believe it just remains to be seen, and something that we need to study much better.
Well, Dr. Evgenia Ilyanskaya, thanks very much indeed for your expertise. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, the UN climate change chief has warned that China is unlikely to bring forward its net zero carbon emissions target from 2060 in time for November's COP26 summit. Patricia Espinosa shared her rather gloomy forecast with our climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter, who reports now from Milan, where this week's Youth COP event is continuing.
Patricia Espinosa leads the global response to climate change at the United Nations. And with the crucial COP26 climate summit in Glasgow just weeks away, she's involved in an urgent diplomatic effort to get countries to make further cuts to their carbon emissions.
John Kerry has previously said that if China doesn't move its net zero target from 2060 to 2050, the efforts of the rest of the world could be in vain. Does the fate of our planet rest on China's shoulders?
China has committed to, the way they put their pledge was before 2060.
So you think it could be 2050?
I hope so. I think maybe they are not there yet at this moment, but I certainly hope they could bring that date forward.
Are you hoping for that by COP?
By COP, I think that will be difficult, but at least to have a plan to do that, to come forward with more ambitious NDCs in the coming years.
But will that be enough for the rest of the world to keep 1.5 alive?
Every day, every moment that passes, the window is smaller. And this is why Glasgow is so important.
What keeps you up at night in relation to the climate crisis?
Oof. There are so many things, but yeah, what I would say probably is the possibility that people would get so discouraged that they would kind of give up. We cannot give up. We cannot give up.
There are many obstacles to overcome if the international community is to make a success of COP26. The science is increasingly clear. Whatever the challenges, more must be done, and quickly. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News in Milan.
Some of today's other climate news now, and Sir Keir Starmer says that Labour is committed to a Green New Deal that would reduce the majority of the UK's emissions by 2030. During his first in-person conference speech, the Labour leader set out how his party would tackle climate change. He also outlined plans to retrofit homes to make sure they're properly insulated and energy efficient.
Emissions from homes have increased, and we have the least energy efficient housing in Europe. So it will be Labour's national mission over the next decade to fit out every home that needs it, to make sure that it is warm, well insulated and costs less to heat. And we'll create thousands of jobs in the process.
The US government has declared the ivory-billed woodpecker and 22 other species extinct. Scientists from the US Fish and Wildlife Service say they've exhausted all efforts to find the 23 species. It's thought more birds and fish could disappear due to rising temperatures and habitat loss caused in part by climate change. The government has announced plans to allow scientists to use gene editing to develop new strains of crops. Scientists say it could breed stronger, healthier plants that can withstand extreme weather brought about by climate change. But the farming charity The Soil Association has warned it's not a long-term solution and could cause environmental damage. Thailand is used to heavy rains during the monsoon months, but the effects of this year's wet season have been exacerbated by a particularly intense tropical storm. Now, it's left much of the country, particularly the north, underwater, and now the capital, Bangkok, is on alert. Well, provinces representing 40% of Thailand have been hit after the tropical storm Dianmu brought flash flooding as well as heavy rain. Now, the yellow areas that you can see here are the 30 provinces that have been affected. Now, most of the flooded areas are agricultural and low lands. Nearly 200,000 households across the country have been impacted by the floods. And at least 7 people have died and 1 person is still missing. Sky's Siobhan Robbins has more.
In flood-hit Thailand, rescuers swoop in. Water has cut off the roads, so this is the best way to get supplies to the stranded. The pilot has a bird's-eye view of the devastation. Here, businesses, schools and homes inundated by heavy rain. Rain, which elsewhere overwhelmed a reservoir, sending torrents into the communities below.
Floodwater doesn't reach inside the house. We're still able to cook and eat there, but going in and out of the house is difficult. I just came back with the rescue workers and went out to get some food. I had to wait for more than 2 hours before I could come home.
Almost 200,000 households have been affected by the floods. Northern and central parts of the country so far bearing the brunt. A tropical storm in monsoon season causing misery for thousands and threatening to flood some of Thailand's most precious historical sites.
Over the last few months, we didn't think there'd be flooding, but the last storm brought a lot of water, which surprised us. But we are prepared enough.
Today, the Prime Minister has been to see some of the damage. Thailand's King and Queen have also sent aid to the needy. Flooding is common in rainy season, but the ferocity of this storm took many by surprise. Villages have become lakes, homes, isolated islands, and in some areas, the water is still rising. Siobhan Robbins, Sky News, Bangkok.
Do stay with us. Coming up after the break, I'm going to be joined by climate justice activist Days Agaji and Sam Hall, director of the Conservative Environment Network. There they are, standing by. We're going to be discussing whether the planet would be better off under a Labour government and if gene editing could be part of the solution to climate change.
Okay, what have we left on? Well, it's a start.
Well, we wanted to create a character that really tackled some very difficult issues in the environment and climate change, but in a really fun and entertaining and it being light for the kids to really engage with OBKI and to find some really good solutions to the difficult subjects that we have to talk about on climate change. I actually found and saw what the environment and climate change is doing to the ocean. So for me, I wanted to create this character that actually is based in the sea because I've seen what climate change has done to our marine life and our oceans. What OBKI is trying to do with the tasks that he has and the topics, for example, what you just showed on the clip was Switch It Up, which is the first episode. And that is showing kids that you can save energy in your house by turning off the lights and electrical appliances that don't need to be on to save energy. And it's finding these topics and explaining them in a fun and environmental way so that the kids can engage and actually, in the end, with their parents and with their friends and communities to actually get involved. For example, also one of the topics that we have is planting an insect garden. And so, you know, that is something that they can all do together and it's not so scary. We're trying to take that away and make it positive and find solutions for climate change.
We don't understand that every lake or a pond is a habitat in itself, which houses frogs, snakes, crabs, turtles, birds, so many different life forms. Human beings directly depend on underground water source. So a lake or a pond is necessary to replenish these groundwater resources.
Did you know if we tried to use less energy, we could help reduce air pollution? What, like turning off the lights and stuff? Yeah.
Thursday will be a windy day with showers or longer spells of rain. A band of rain, heavy at times, will push southeastwards across England and Wales, although the far southeast may stay dry. Scotland and Northern Ireland and Ireland will have a mix of sunny spells and heavy blustery showers. Taking a look at the daily air quality index, where levels of air pollution are bandied from 1 being low to 10 being very high, the unsettled and rather windy conditions will help maintain low levels of air pollution on Thursday.
The Air Quality Report, sponsored by Philips Air Purifiers.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Now, we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day now with climate justice activist Days Agaji and Sam Hall, director of the Conservative Environment Network. So good evening to both of you. Good to have you both on. So let's go to our first topic. And we heard Keir Starmer earlier in the show laying out his climate proposals. So we're asking, would Labour being in charge be better for the planet? So, Days, let's take a look at what he said. £28 billion a year for the next decade to tackle climate change. There's also money for green steel, money for retrofitting homes to make them more energy efficient. So does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I think that Labour would be an amazing government to forward the climate change agenda. As we have the Tories currently now, we see that there's a lot of talk about being climate leaders, but we're still yet to see them achieve their own targets. This is an issue and we need to start seeing it as an issue. I think that Keir Starmer today, within his speech, speaking upon things like having a Clean Air Act, having a bringing in insulation, which seems to be a really hot topic amongst the protests that's been happening. I do think that having the Labour Party, what they're promising, could be really amazing for this country. But then also, I think there's a little bit of hesitance around the Labour Party as at the moment, they're a very fractured party, and I think they need to really work on some of the internal conflicts and come together so they are stronger and better for the next election.
Sam, you're a Conservative, so what do you make of that criticism that the Tories are all talk and no action, and that would you agree that Labour's plans do look better for the planet?
Well, I disagree, firstly, that the Conservatives are all talk and no action. Yes, there are some strong targets that the government's put in place, but you have also seen alongside that deep emissions cut, particularly in the power sector, where coal has gone from over 30% of our electricity mix down to almost zero in the space of a few years. Renewables have ramped up. We've got the biggest offshore wind sector in the world. So I don't think that's a fair criticism. In terms of Labour's proposals, I actually do think that there is a case for more spending on climate change, and I hope that the Chancellor addresses that in the comprehensive spending review. I think it will help people install insulation, which will cut their energy bills. I think it could also help us get a first mover advantage in a number of green industries. But I disagree that this should be a predominantly publicly financed and funded transition. I think there's a huge wall of private capital out there waiting to invest in green industries and green infrastructure. Look at the offshore wind sector, for example, which has been built predominantly through private finance. I worry that with some of Labour's proposals, you risk crowding out the private sector and you don't fully capitalise on the innovation, the cost reductions, which only come from private sector competition. And I think that's why the Conservative approach, whilst there's still more to do, and I'm not here to say the government's yet on track to its targets, I think that approach ultimately is the one that will get us to net zero quickest and with popular consent.
OK, Days, what do you make of that?
Well, I don't really agree with you. I think that within the last reports that we got from the Climate Change Committee, it is showing that the government is not on their targets and they are seriously lacking behind. I do worry about putting the hands of our future in business. As we can see, there is a lot of issues with business not being accountable for the climate catastrophes they are causing, and there needs to be really strong government in this, I believe.
And what about some of the other criticism, Sam, that's levelled at the government? The Green Homes grant that was scrapped after 6 months, the fact that the Cambo oil field could get the go-ahead, the lack of ban on new oil and gas projects. Do you think that's undermined the government's green credentials? And how important is that, given that we're going into COP in November with the UK as hosts?
Well, on the Green Homes grant, I mean, it's important to note that that was introduced as a short-term stimulus measure to create jobs and get the economy going post-COVID. There is a need desperately for more energy efficiency funding, as I said, and I hope that in the comprehensive spending review and the heat and building strategy, which the government is shortly due to publish, there will be more funding to give households vouchers and other incentives to insulate their homes. That I agree that is a missing piece at the moment, but I don't think it was right to look at the Green Homes grant for doing that project, for doing that policy. In terms of oil and gas, you know, we are going to see a decline in oil and gas use as a result of our net zero target that the Climate Change Committee thinks about 70% by 2050. I do therefore think we need to look at, you know, how the oil and gas sector is going to wind down and how we need to instead ramp up green energy to take its place. You know, the government has said there's going to be this climate checkpoint, which will make sure that any new oil and gas licenses are compatible with our targets, and I think that's the key. We need to get that policy right so that we are still in line with our net zero target, even if there is going to be ongoing oil and gas, which we do still need. OK, let's move on to our second topic, shall we? Because the government is saying that it'll allow scientists to explore gene editing to develop different strains of crops which will produce higher yields and be more resistant to climate change. Sam, to you first of all, do you welcome the opening up of gene editing? Would it be good for the planet, do you think? I do welcome this. I think it's a great opportunity, actually, which we can take advantage of outside the EU to introduce more innovation-friendly policy. I think gene editing does have potential, for example, to reduce the amount of carbon-intensive fertiliser that we use to grow crops. I think it also potentially will enable us to grow higher yields on existing land, which means we can leave more land for nature and for carbon sequestration. So I think this is a win for the climate, and it's only the first step. I think there's more to do. The government's going to look at the wider regulatory regime on gene editing, but I strongly welcome it.
OK, and Days, what's your take? I mean, George Eustice, the Environment Secretary, has said it's a tool that could help us tackle some of the biggest challenges that we face around food security. Are you in agreement with Sam and George Eustice?
Well, I think there are some positives that come up with the idea of using GMO crops. As Sam's mentioned, the nutrition, the more resilience. However, I do think that we need to recognise that there isn't long-term evidence on how this affects the environment, and this could actually be tinkering with nature and causing larger issues than we already face. There is lots of questions about biodiversity, and remembering that in this, environmental crisis that we're facing, climate is one part, and that's only one boundary out of the 9 that we have. And biodiversity is there as a very prominent second boundary, and there may be issues around biodiversity with following through some of these scientific technologies.
Days, the government is saying that the foods would only be allowed to be sold if they were judged that they don't present a health risk, they don't mislead consumers, they don't have a lower nutritional value. Does that give you some kind of reassurance?
Sadly, not really. I feel that the government has a track record of putting forward profit before people's health. We can see that with things like the Cambo oil field or HS2 or even the Silvertown Tunnel expansion. So there is that kind of question of, can I truly trust this current government to uphold people's well-being before profit? And the answer, sadly, is no.
Sam?
I think this is quite a cautious move from the government. All they're doing is making the research and development of these genetic varieties of genetically engineered varieties of crops easier and less bureaucratic. There are still going to be strong regulatory processes around the actual selling of these gene-edited crop varieties in terms of people's supermarket shopping. So I think the government is right to take this step by step. And the weight of scientific evidence, I think the consultation responses they had from academics in particular does show that people think there is no additional risk to biodiversity or to human health from this measure, because it is simply accelerating processes that happen naturally in nature or indeed through traditional breeding methods. So it's not really introducing foreign genetic material, which I think is traditional with GM crops.
We must leave it there. Sam Hall and Days Agaji, really good to talk to you both. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. Do stay tuned.